Good morning, everyone, or whatever time of day it is that you're watching this vlog. Uh, we're in for what I think is an interesting conversation today. First, because we're going to be talking with, or I'm going to be talking with a friend of mine who always teaches me something every time we talk, and I'll get to that introduction in a moment. But secondly, this is our first podcast, the first time I've ever done this. I think it's probably the first time that Ed's ever done this. It's going to be, I think, good, but it's going to be a little bit messy and a little bit choppy, and please bear with me. And my son came up with a great idea. I said, hey, he asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm doing a podcast. And he said, oh, you're doing a Bobcast. So that's what we're going to call this, Bobcast. So a little bit of background about why Ed's here today. I've been doing a number of blogs that deal with how we make the best of the pandemic that we're all experiencing. And so it's one where we can all have a collective pity party and get stuck and have all the emotions that I think are natural to have. But is this also a time that we can leverage this time to make some changes in our life that ultimately we all come out the other end of this better and happier people? And that brings me to Ed. Ed's going to share his experience with adversity, and specifically an illness, a life-changing illness, Guillain-Barre. Did I say it a little bit better that time?
Perfect, Bob.
Okay, thanks. Ed was struck with Guillain-Barre while he was in his 50s, and for those of you that aren't aware of this disease, it essentially attacks your nerve system. So it literally, your body actually works against your nerve system. And I'd like Ed to share a little bit about his experience with it, and then how it changed his life. And is there a lesson to kind of be gleaned from what Ed experienced to help us look at our situation today? So Ed, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you, Bob.
It's not easy being the guinea pig, the first person up, so please bear with me. So let's start by take us back to that time in your life when you were struck with Guillain-Barre, and tell us what was happening at the time and how you first became aware that you were ill.
Be glad to, Bob. I was about 58 years old. I was laid off from my current job, my then current job of 20 years. I was very lucky. I got a golden parachute. I made some decisions. Do I want to start back in the business world, or do I want to just stay retired? And I decided to stay retired. I was very active. I played a lot of sports. I was a big dancer, and I was really enjoying life quite nicely. One evening I came home and I had two strange pains in my knees. Each knee had a pain that was not describable. I ignored it, of course, like most of us guys do. Went to bed, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with a pain in my back that was excruciating, a pain I never felt before. It scared me so much, I went to the hospital. I go to the hospital, they checked me out, they gave me some level of muscle relaxer, and sent me home and told me nothing was wrong with me. I just probably torqued something and some tension. 2 days later, it was about 11 o'clock at night. I'll never forget it. I was sitting in my bedroom and I could feel energy sapping from my body. I didn't feel like I was going to pass out, but I felt my limbs and my body getting weaker. And I called a friend and literally begged him to take me to the hospital. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening, and I went to the hospital just knowing I'm going to get answers to what's going on. I got to the hospital, they checked me out and did whatever they did and released me, or told me I was going to be released. And I said, please don't release me. Something's wrong. I've been to the emergency room 2 times in 3 days. Something's going on. I'm really scared. I said, what can I do? I need a next step. I went to a neurologist the next day after calling many, because they don't take you without some good reasons. And they did some tests on me, and it was kind of sad in its own ways. I wanted so much to believe everything was okay, as they were doing a nerve continuity test. And as they were doing this test, the doctor would say to me, do you feel this? Do you feel that? And I'd say no. And I'm kind of smiling because wow, there really is nothing wrong with me. This is going to go away. Wrong. He did set me up. What really was happening, he found that my nerves weren't working very well, and I had some neuropathy setting in my body. So he made an appointment for me to be entered into the hospital next Monday. He wasn't too concerned. All right. So at least I had some level of an answer where somebody was going to do something. My mom and I had scheduled a lunch that day. So we went out to lunch, and I wanted to update her what was going on and talk to her. And I shared my story with her, but I shared it very carefully. My mother was a love you to death kind of girl. She was 85. She was about 5 foot tall. I'd make the best. And at that point, my dad had died, and her life kind of circled around me because I was the family she had at that point. Look. So we go to lunch, had a great lunch. As we're walking out of lunch, I'll call it melted into the sidewalk. I didn't fall. I just kind of collapsed into the sidewalk. Imagine my mom, she looks at me and says, Edward, are you okay? I said, Mom, please go into the restaurant and get someone out here to help me. I'm in trouble. And she goes to the restaurant, and she gets a couple of the waiters to come out. They literally pour me into the car. And you can imagine my mom is panicking. I wanted to panic, but I didn't want her to panic. So bottom line, I said, Mom, please just drive me to the hospital. She drives me to the hospital. And bottom line is, the last thing I can remember for that day is she got me there. She pulled up to the front door, and I saw a couple of nurses or medical assistants coming out. And that was the end of my day. I woke up, I don't know about you guys, but when I have dreams, and sometimes when I'm coming out of my dream, I say to myself, oh, it's only a dream. Don't worry about it if it's not good news. Well, my dream was that I was underwater, like in an old Western, breathing through a reed under the water, if you will. So as I'm coming to, as it turned out, the reason I thought I was underwater is I had an oxygen mask on, and I had all kinds of tubes stuck down my throat. And my first inclination was to rip that mask off. Now, obviously, I couldn't rip the mask off. I was paralyzed. But in my mind, I was ripping that off. And the nurse said to me, please calm down. You're going to be okay. I waited for a second, and all of a sudden, I could breathe through that mask. And as terrible as that previous situation was, I now was pretty happy because I had a mask. So being under the water, which was horrifying, I was kind of like, okay. She said to me, if you'd like, you can try to take the mask off. It'll be okay. And I really had to think about it, because what was once my hell had now become my salvation. I took the mask off, and I actually ended up being able to breathe. And that started my Guillain-Barre adventure. I was a healthy guy. I was a guy that I had the best things in life. I was very athletic. And here I am laying in a bed, paralyzed and not knowing what to do. I was scared. I was disoriented. And in my mind, I still was afraid. They didn't know what was wrong with me. And I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
So you gave us a little bit about your emotional well-being. Could you kind of describe as those days and perhaps weeks that followed, kind of take us in terms of your journey to recovery, because you're obviously well now, and kind of what was happening in your head? What was kind of your mindset getting through this?
The first realization I really came to was that I was helpless. I mean, I was afraid, but I was afraid and I could do nothing about it. I couldn't move. My arms were my arms were gone, my legs were gone, and my lower body was gone. I was extremely blessed because my heart still worked fine, my mind still worked fine, and my voice still worked fine. So I could speak and I could think, but I couldn't do anything else. And that feeling of helplessness is a very scary, and it's a very humbling feeling. Probably the part of my story that touches me the most is once I came to the realization of how helpless I was and how scared I was. I said a prayer, and it was quite a miracle. It was one of my real evidences that there is a God in my life. I prayed for help, and I prayed for courage, to be honest with you, and I just prayed for knowledge. And it was really quite interesting because one of the next very first things that happened was a nurse came in to me and said, Edward, after they finished their diagnostics and they found out what was wrong, and by the way, back in those days, they didn't diagnose Guillain-Barre syndrome very well. They still don't really know what causes it. It can come from a whole number of things. By the way, I still can't take flu shots. So if we talk about the pandemic, while
Wow.
some people will have a nice shot they can take, guess what? It's very risky for me to do that because my result might be getting Guillain-Barre again. So it's an interesting time. So the nurse comes up to me and she says, Edward, I want you to use this thought. She gave me a near-term goal. And my near-term goal was, she took her finger and she said, from my head, down my shoulder, all the way down my arm to my finger. And she says, I want you to mentally visualize this. I want you to think about transmitting that thought down to your finger and get your finger to move. And it was actually quite wonderful because I had a challenge, I had a focus. But what I really got from my prayer was, all of a sudden, I felt the level of optimism that I am going to get some degree of better. I didn't know how much better I was going to get, but that simple goal of moving my finger versus worrying about if I'll walk again or if I'm going to dead or if Guillain-Barre is going to reoccur, I didn't have to worry about that distraction. I kept focused on the finger. And when that finger moved, I can still remember the joy and the elation. And I guess the other thing that was kind of fun is I made sure I celebrated that finger. So when I went from finger 1 to finger 2, and that, by the way, that was about 3 days later. It wasn't a fast process.
Yeah.
I reminded myself of that one finger moving, and I kept my prayers going, but I kept my optimism going. And slowly but surely, things started moving. The whole process took about 4 months. I had some wonderful support from my mom and my daughter and my girlfriend at the time. But I still had hours and hours of downtime, alone, being helpless. I had to be taken on and put on and taken off toilets, and I had to ring bells and wait for people. They had to lift my 215 pounds out of the bed because I could not walk. And so you only can imagine what goes on with that. So everything I did had a level of fear, unknown, and helplessness, whereas depending on somebody else.
Yeah, it's listening to you, Ed. I heard a quote yesterday from Madeleine Albright talking about the situation, and she said, "I'm an optimist who worries a lot." And so, as I was listening to you, I was reminded of that quote, which I think I can relate to as well. So you were in the hospital how long?
I was in the hospital about 4 months, Bob.
Okay, and could you just tell us, like, what did you get back in terms of your capabilities, and when you left the hospital?
All right. So when I say I was in the hospital for 4 months, I was actually in 3 or 4 hospitals for 4 months, because the first one I went into with the emergency room did a level of service for me. The next, I had something called telephoresis, which is where they really drain your blood and they filter out the bad and they put in new, if you will. And that had to happen in someplace else. And then I had to have some really good care when I was really sick. And then, of course, I did rehabilitative work for about, I guess, a month and a half. And my goal was for that month and a half, Bob. This is after the medical stuff is found out. They gave me the help with the medical things. Well, now I had to put my paralyzed body back together.
Wow.
Because I was rebuilding. I was rebuilding those muscles, and I could not get out of the hospital until I could walk 30 steps with somebody they had a special belt they put on me. They would hold the belt so I wouldn't fall. But I had to walk 30 steps, and I had to climb up 3 steps, turn around, and climb down 3 steps. And at that
Wow.
point, I could get out. So
Yeah, let me
I don't
give
know
our
if I answered your question or
you
not,
you
Bob.
actually did great. I'll tell you there. Let me give our listeners some perspective. Ed and I spent 3 days last fall doing the Appalachian Trail. I guess that's how you say it. We hiked the Appalachian Trail, and Ed is all of 6'2", 6'3", in great shape. So to hear what you were describing as your experience and seeing you today is truly a miracle. But let's bring us to today. Looking back now, uh, tell us how your experience with Guillain-Barre changed your life.
Um, I actually look back at that experience, Bob, and I actually think of it as a good experience. For me, what it did is it gave me a second chance to appreciate life. I got to really see who my real close family members were. I got to see who my real close friends were. Uh, I got a chance to reflect on myself and be grateful for those around me. You know, when I was in that hospital, I mentioned earlier, I was about 215, and these little nurses had to actually lift you up out of bed in a sense, what's called a knee lift. Well, 99% of them couldn't do them. And there was a lady nurse who I'll never forget who who saw me and saw them struggle. And she had many shifts in many places, but she would come to my room every day. It still touches me greatly, and make sure that I got to the bathroom safely. Uh, there was a time when they were lifting me out of bed, Bob, and you know when someone's at the end of their strength, they kind of shake a little bit and they get
Sure.
really, really crazy. Well, this nurse she was trying to do a great job, but here she is. She's picking me up out of the bed and she's starting to shake. And now we're starting to wobble back and forth. Now, Bob, I'm paralyzed. I can't do nothing. And if I fall forward, God knows what I do to her and God knows what I do to me. And luckily, we ended up falling backwards. I laid on that bed and cried like a baby in frustration of not only do I have what's going on with me, I'm too big to be handled. I wasn't blaming her. I'm just saying, wow, I'm totally at jeopardy, right? And the short of the story is, at that point, a doctor heard the commotion, came into the room, and he told me that I better calm down, or they will put me in a different hospital. And kind of the lesson, kind of where I'm going is, helpless is a horrible thing. I don't think you can understand how much control people have on you. If they want to be nasty to you, they can be nasty. If they want to be nice, they can be nice. So you get a real idea of, you better not rock too many windows or whatever, and you better be nice. But in that time to think, you know, Guillain-Barre could have been a lifetime disabling. The Guillain-Barre syndrome, it comes in a couple of different forms. One of those forms leaves you paralyzed for life. Another one of those forms slowly takes away things over years, and you become worse and worse and worse. It's almost like you're dying a fast death in
Mm,
terms of in terms of neuropathy, if you will, right?
sure.
And I was lucky enough because when mine hit, mine was the kind that hits you for 7 days. It takes everything it could get. Thank God I was in good shape, because I think the shape I was in, even though I wasn't a youngster, stopped it where it stopped. So I always found myself grateful that even though I was helpless and it was horrible, and even though I couldn't walk or move was horrible, I could have been dead, or I could have been on a regulator. And so I found a lot of joy in that, and I recognize that. And as I said earlier, watching those loved ones around you, and you have a time to look at yourself. You have a time to appreciate who really appreciates you, and you appreciate, and you have a time to realize that life is a blessing, and this is a second chance. And what are you going to do with it? Are you going to make the best out of that second chance, or are you going to whine about the fact that, why did it have to happen to me? I
Yeah.
chose to make the best.
Yeah.
And where my heart goes in here, Bob, my blessing in the end was, it's been 15 years since I recovered from Guillain-Barre. And here's my blessing, Bob. I live every day with a smile and with a thought that says, how am I going to make the best time out of my day today? Who are the people that I want to be around? And that's basically based on who are the people that want to be around me. Negativity, people expect the best, give the best, and make sure you keep yourself in that environment and keep grateful. As you know, I was lucky enough to meet my wife 10 years ago. I am blessed as can be, but I truly believe I would not have met her had I not gone through this environment and gotten myself in a place where she may find me desirable, which I thank God for. And I thank God for what I have. I'm back to that active, crazy guy that really enjoys life and looks for things to keep busy. But I never forget the adversity, and I use it and I keep it. And to me, it's kind of a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. So as I'm listening to you, and for our listeners, Ed really is a crazy fun guy, and he's got a little bit of competitive streak, which is really endearing. So he's back on it. So what I found interesting, and I want to bring it to where we are today with the coronavirus. I found this to be a real paradox when you talked about the hopelessness, the frustration, the actual how scared you were, and yet looking back, you can say, that it had a really positive outcome on your life. We're in the middle of this, or maybe we're at the beginning of this pandemic. What would you say to our viewers today that would help us understand the situation we're in and perhaps how to see a light at the end of the tunnel, or to see where the good can come out of this based on your experience?
This is how I live my life now. This pandemic is no more fun for Mary Ellen and myself than for anybody else. And we're actually blessed because we're retired and we have some income. We're not, we were not in that very unfortunate part of the population that not only are they blessed with the hiding out and taking care of kids, and they're not making any money. So with the understanding that almost all the people I know are blessed, even though we're in a situation that's quite bad, things could be a lot worse. Here's how I look at, here's what I think is important for here's how I handle myself in this situation. Number one, to me, faith in somebody greater than yourself is a wonderful thing. To me, it allows you to have an optimistic thought about the long-term event, the long-term goal of what's going on. So I believe this will come to fruition. I don't know when it comes to the solution for this will come. But what I do know is it's going to come, and I'm going to have faith in that, and I'm going to do the best I can while that's coming. I don't focus on what the date is because I don't think we can know that. The other thing I do is I recommend people do is they come up with some short-term goals, whether they have a daily activity goal or a weekly activity goal, something that lets them focus on something other than all the news we hear. I love the news and I love knowing, but we are inundated, and I don't think you can live day in, day out, minute in, minute out on every statistic that's coming across the thing. So get a short-term goal. Thirdly, surround yourself with positive people. It's kind of interesting to me. Most of my friends are in a really pretty good place, all things being said. They're retired, they have income, and all they have is, including myself, we've kind of been robbed of our socialness and our being able to play our sports and getting together for coffee. And that's not fun either, if you will. Mm. But in my mind, I find it very refreshing to keep positive people around me. In this time, There's many things I don't like. There's many complaints I have, but I try to look at what's good. I think about what the government's federal, local, friends, people have done. And I believe that more has been done in a shorter time than ever in our history. And even though I can find pimples and warts and sometimes big cuts, I think we need to spend some time saying, as Americans, we're very, very lucky people and celebrate that. Other thing I do is I celebrate my wife every day. She is my support system now, and I feel really blessed to have someone. I have some friends that are single. I have too many friends that are single, and they are really struggling because they don't have that person's shoulder. So whether you get on a Skype call with your friends, or you get on a Zoom call with your friends, or you give your wife that extra hug, or I think it's really important. And I think nextly, it's important to celebrate the good. Every time something good happens, take the good in. Let the good take the space. If there's a hollow space in your mind, it will be filled with bad. You have to learn to stack it up with the good, and it will force out some of the bad. I don't believe in denial, but I do believe in you better put some good in there, or the bad will get you sooner or later. And the other thing that I think is the other thing I'm hopeful about, and I really hope everybody can get a little bit of this, is adversity is a horrible, horrible thing. It's lonely, it's scary, it's limiting, it's boring. There's many, many things that are terrible about adversity. And not all adversity is the same. I'm only speaking from my perspective as a retired guy with an income. There are many people who this adversity is crippling to and may be crippling forever. And I don't know how to talk to that because I cannot even believe what these poor people are going through. So I want to make sure that's understood. But I do believe that it is really important to embrace diversity. And what I mean by that is don't look at the negative side, don't blame, don't look to find criticism. Look for something you can get out of it. Take time to self-reflect. You get a real good look at who your good friends are and who your average friends are. You get a real good look at how good or bad your relationship with your wife is. And you get a real good time to look at yourself and say, how am I doing? And you know what defines us all, Bob, is how we are in times of diversity. Not when we're having the best of lives and we do what everybody can be good in that environment. That's pretty easy. So it's a second chance to look at life. Take what you've learned, surround yourself with those people. Thank God there's a God, and just take it day by day.
Wow, that's really powerful. There's two themes that really struck me, and Ed, you know me, I always listen for what's kind of the theme that's weaving through your story, and two strike me at this time. The first is the whole idea of choice. If I think about all the examples that you gave through your illness, and even what you said just now about how to get through this pandemic and be better on the other side of it, the theme of choice is there again and again and again. So I appreciate that. And oftentimes when you're stuck typically means you don't see a way out, and choice gives that to you. And the second really powerful theme, so this is for me, and hopefully this will strike a chord with our viewers. At a time like this, what's the finger that I want to move? You're a big strapping guy, you're 6'5". You could do anything you wanted almost before you were struck down. We could go out to movies, we could be with friends, we could party, we could bike, we could play pickleball, we could go earn a living. And all of a sudden, those things are all gone. And so here we are. So as I look at my day, as I look at the week, what's the metaphor for moving that little finger. And so, there's probably more, and I want to give you the final word, but I've enjoyed our time together. I know you pretty well, but I know you a little bit better after this.
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So any other, when I interview people for a job, my last question is, I said, I'm not the best interviewer. So is there anything that you want to share with me and our viewers that I was unable to steer you? What else would you like to say in closing?
I really think you did a good job, and I love your theme of happiness. I view it a little different than happiness. It's just don't let it get you down, and look for the positive, and look for the good. And if I had a hope for anybody that listens to this, my basic hope would be they would just try to find a way through all the things they hear and see to recognize all the help we've had. We have food, we have medicine. Gosh, we're getting money from the government. It's not perfect, but if I look at what's been done in this amount of time, anybody that's not walking around saying they're not proud to be an American and haven't looked at the resources of what this country in total, top to bottom, can deliver, I feel a little sorry for them, because they're just missing the big picture.
Yeah, that's great. So if you don't mind, Ed, I'm going to do a little bit of shameless promoting right now. If you enjoyed our Bobcast today, by all means, let me know down in the comments section. If you have a suggestion for a future Bobcast, I'd like to hear it. And if you liked what you heard today, my last few blogs have essentially been around the theme of being to make positive change in these turbulent times. So go back and read my podcast. Ed, let you get to your day, and I can only thank you enough for being with us today.
Thanks, Bob. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, see you, Ed.
Appreciate it.